we'll get through today, and then tomorrow you'll just be like, so much better. Okay. With that being said, let's go ahead and jump into it. Let's see, I need to open this. Give me just 1 second here. Okay. All right, so this is what we'll be doing in the project today. So the focus today is to be able to implement a React higher order component to conditionally render protected content. So this is the key for what we'll be learning today. Goes through the daily setup, the description, and then the tasks. And just another, I want to touch on this again like we did on Monday. For this day in particular, the explanation and the steps here under tasks are a lot different than what you see if you go to the solution branch for today. So just a heads up there. If you look at the solution branch, I can 100% guarantee you will be totally lost. You will not understand what's happening in the solution branch because it is completely different than what you'll see today and different than the instructions that have been written out. So just a heads up. Cool, let's go ahead and jump into it. So higher order components. What are higher order components? Well, in order to get to a point that we understand what higher order components do and what they are, we're going to start with some basics in JavaScript. So I'm going to open up a replit here. So this first part is, I just want you to follow along as we're going to build out logical steps to understand how a higher order component works based on some JavaScript-y things. Okay, so just follow along on my screen here. You don't have to try and why doesn't that work? JavaScript. You don't have to try and do this on your own screen. Okay. Let's close that. Not sure what to do? Haha, I know exactly what we want to do. All right, so first things first, this is for higher order components, or hawks. First things first, we want to understand some basic JavaScript function things. And so we're just going to start right here. So if I have function let's see, yeah, function number return 42. So pretty basic function, right? That is the same as something like this. Right? These two are equal in pretty much every way. They're going to do the same thing. You call them the same way. One is a regular function. One is an arrow function. This is also the same as something like this. Const number right? This is implicitly returning 42. This is explicitly returning 42, the same as this function up here. So all these functions, even though the syntax is different, they are all basically the same thing. So let's take this a little bit further. This is our starting point today. We're going to do something like, let's go ahead and console log these out. Console log, comment these out. Okay, so let's do something like function person that takes in a name, and let's return an object where name is name. Okay, pretty easy to see what's happening here. We're giving this an argument, probably a string with a name, and we're returning an object that has one property and one value. So following what we just saw above, we can do something like this. To achieve the same result. So we've got a function called person that takes in a name and implicitly returns an object. Now, in an arrow function, when you implicitly return something, you don't need the curly braces around the body, and you don't need the return keyword. But if we want to implicitly return an object, and we don't have these curly braces, then the JavaScript engine thinks that this is the body of the function, and now you have something like this, which doesn't make sense to the computer, right? You would have to wrap this in curly braces and say return. So if you have a set of curly braces, without parentheses, you have to have two sets of curly braces. The first set is the function body. The second set is the object. If you don't want to do that, it doesn't let me go back. If you don't want to do that, then you have to surround the your curly braces with parentheses. Okay, again, these are the same thing here. Okay, so let's move on. Let's take this to the next level. The next step that we want to take in our logical flow is to pass a function as an argument. Again, something that we have all seen before, right? So we're gonna keep doing arrow functions now that we understand arrow functions. We're gonna keep with our arrow functions here. We're gonna say execute takes in some func and invokes that function. So let's think about this function right here. If we invoke execute, and inside the invoking parentheses, we pass in a function, just by invoking execute and passing in a function, that function we pass in is going to get invoked. So we could do something like, let's pass in an arrow function here, and this arrow function calls alert, and we say executed. So by doing this, we're passing in an anonymous arrow function, and this anonymous arrow function is going to get invoked inside execute, which will alert this string here. So when we click run, why is alert not defined? That's weird. That should, yeah, see, that's defined. Well, that's good. Do you guys know what's going on? Let's just go console.log. There we go. There's executed. I have no idea why alert wasn't working there. Okay, we'll move on from that weird alert thing. But what we want to understand is that this function, this anonymous function that's getting passed in here, when we invoke execute, we're going to invoke that anonymous function. Or whatever function, it doesn't have to be an anonymous function, whatever function we pass in here, it's going to get invoked. Okay, what about a function that returns a function? What if we do something like function get one, and this function returns a function that returns the number 1. Well, thinking about what we started with, how we can turn regular functions into arrow functions, let's try to refactor this into an arrow function. I want you to think for about a minute as I want you to think about writing this in a 1-line arrow function. And then if you think you have a solution for that, post it in Slack. Oh, good to know. I usually do ES6, but yeah, this is Node. So is there like a ES6 one? There used to be. Weird. Okay, again, we're taking this function, and I want you to think about writing this as an arrow function, and then see if you can write it as a 1-line arrow function. It's going to look super weird. And then see what you can come up with. Oh, hey, nice. Good, good. I like it. Keep going if you're typing. Man, isn't this stuff crazy? Oh, so cool. Okay, yeah, you guys did awesome. 10 points for everyone who posted an answer for that. Thank you. I'm going to go over what each of these are and how this works. So quite a few of you wrote yours, like I'm going to write mine. So we want a const variable to capture the value of our arrow function, just like this const variable or this function variable is capturing this function. This get1 variable here is capturing this function here. So we're going to capture an arrow function. Now, if we want to implicitly return something, then we just have to write out that thing we want to return to the right of the arrow, right? So this function up here returns the number 42. Well, if we want to return a function, all we have to do is write out a function to the right of our arrow. So let's go ahead and write out another arrow function. And then this inner function now is this second arrow function here. this inner function returns the number 1. So we want this second function to return that number. So to the right of this arrow, we're going to return the number 1. This is so cool. Oh, this is just the start though. This is gonna blow your minds. I love this. All right, so this looks so weird, right? But this is absolutely valid syntax. If we did something, we could put this inside inside curly braces and do this. If I could type today, that would accomplish the same thing. So would this. So all of that's the same as our one-liner. That was const get 1 equals an arrow function that implicitly returns a function that implicitly returns 1. So this is the same as both of these. We're going to comment those out because we actually want to call get 1 here. So let's do this. I'm going to call this function. What do you think this is going to return? What gets returned if I call this function here? Oh man, it's like half and half. Okay, if you said function, you are correct. If you said 1, that is incorrect, but I'll show you how we get to 1. Let me see what questions we have here. Yeah, so Austin says there's no need to wrap the inner function in parens like this. So yeah, I did see this a lot. You can do this. This is valid syntax because what you're saying is I have a JavaScript expression that I want to have evaluated. And so that's fine, but you don't have to do that. You really only need those parentheses in 2 cases. 1, if you want to return an object. 2, if you want your implicit return to be on multiple lines, like JSX. So those are really kind of the 2 use cases for wrapping a return value in parentheses. Okay. So let's, yeah, this is very common to keep the inner function anonymous. Okay, so lots of people here said 1 and lots of people said function. Let's do this, let's run this and see what we get. So the green is our return value for an invoked function in Replit. So you can see that we invoked get 1 and it was returned, a function was returned from get 1, right? Let's look at why this happens. So here's our variable name. The value of this variable is this function right here. So when we invoke this variable, this function, what is to the right of this arrow? It's a function. So that's why we didn't get 1 returned out of this function call. It returns function. Now what's really cool about this, we're going to see this in just a minute, but let's do something crazy here. If we have a function that's returned here, we can invoke this function, right? So let's get this function by calling get 1, and then let's invoke that function that's returned. What? Mind's blown. Okay, with this, what is this going to return now? what does this inner function return? Remember, when we invoke get1 once, it returns this function right here. So what's to the right of this arrow? What does this inner function return? Several people are typing. Oh, weird. That was funny. My bad. I was like, everybody's typing, but nobody's sending anything. Okay, cool. Yes, you guys got it correct. 1. This is going to return 1. Sorry. Oh, my bad. So let's run this, and 1. Nice, good work. All right. Okay, hopefully brains aren't imploded yet, because we are going to take this one step further. This pattern isn't too common, but you can actually do some really cool stuff with this. So let's look at what we can do, where we can use this, and how it could, what kind of cool stuff we can do with this. So we're going to create a function called multiply. And this function is going to take in a number, and it's going to return a function. And then this inner function is also going to take in a number. So we're just going to call this y. So we have one function that returns another function. Both of these functions take in a number. And then we're going to multiply both numbers together. And so when we invoke multiply twice and we pass in 2 numbers, then those 2 numbers will be multiplied and returned out of our multiply function. And you're probably thinking, Dustin, this is ridiculous, because I could write this very simply with one function without this weird inner function thing. And first of all, it would look a lot less confusing. Second of all, it would still do the same thing, right? That's exactly what you're thinking, right? So let's try this. We're going to go 5 and 20. We're going to see what this does. And then I'm going to show you why we're writing it this way, and the power that this gives us. So what is this going to return here? And I'll scroll this time. We're multiplying, not adding. Yep, 100. So let's check it out. Bam, 100. So it's as if we had put this 5 here, making this 5, and 20 here, making this 20. So by calling this twice, we multiplied 2 numbers together. But why didn't we just write this like this? Right, this would accomplish the same thing as this, right? Wrong! It doesn't. This, well, I'll show you. I'll show you what I mean. With this function here, we can do something really cool. We can create on the fly functions that we can create on the fly multiplier functions. So what I mean by that is, let's make a variable called multiply by 5. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to invoke multiply once and pass in the number 5. So if I do this, what is multiply by 5 going to come out to be? What gets returned by this and gets captured by multiply by 5 right here? Yeah, function. Yes, this gives me a function that multiplies things by 5. Perfect, yeah. So let's check this out. So if I console.log multiply by 5, then I get this function. So what happens if I, since this is a function, what happens if I call multiply by 5? Well, let's first see what this function even is. So by doing this, I've passed the number 5 into x, replacing this x with 5. So what is returned from this function call right here? Everything to the right of the arrow. So y, so this function that is now captured by multiply by 5 is this right here. So I can copy this and paste it right there, and that's basically what multiply by 5 is. It's a function that takes in a number and multiplies that number by 5. So now that I have a function that takes in a number and multiplies that number by 5, what happens if I pass in 20 here? Oh, I have to turn these back into x's. I get 100. Or if I want to pass in 10, I'm going to get 50. I can now take this function that was created on the fly by calling this, and it will multiply anything that I want by 5. Now why, again, the question is, why do we write it this way and not this way? Well, I can create my multiply by 5 function, but I can do this again. And I can say multiply is starting to look weird. Multiply by 12. If I want a function, if I want to create a function on the fly, dynamically create a function that multiplies any number by 12, all I have to do now is call multiply and pass in 12. And magically, I have a function here that multiplies numbers by 12. So what am I going to get? Trick question. What am I going to get here? I don't know what 12 times 46 is. Let's see. 552. Let's do one that you know a little bit better here. Let's say times 2, and then call that. We get 24. So now I can create any multiply by anything function I want by calling this. We can't do that with this. So this is a way to create a function that we can capture in a variable to run another function. Whew, okay. So that's we're going to take a break. I'm going to check Slack, see if we've got any questions. We'll take a break. And then we're going to look at higher order functions and take that final step into higher order components. Okay, cool. Just have this question down here. Is this being achieved via chaining between function scopes? Yeah, so this inner function is scoped to this, or shares the scope of this outer function. This outer function cannot access this y variable, right? But this inner function can access this x variable. So when we call multiply and pass in the number 5, the function that is saved into this variable, the multiply by 5 variable, will forever and always have this x replaced with 5, with the value 5. So if we were to look at this under the hood, we would see this inner function, and the value for x would be 5. So yeah, this is all dealing with scope and closure. Really good question. I think it's important to name those things, and so we can remember, kind of jog our memory from when we learned those a couple weeks ago. Yeah, example of closures. Nice. This is not quite recursion. What does this do? I don't think this would do anything. I don't know that this is, because get1, first of all, doesn't take in an argument. So I think this will actually break. Yeah. So squiggly line, expression expected. So we wrote expression parentheses inside here, kind of like these. These are expression parentheses, but it's empty, and you can't have expression parentheses empty. It's expecting an expression now. Good question though. I like it. All right, let's take a 5-minute break, and then we'll come back and look at all the higher order things. Alrighty, here we go. Buckle up. I love this, by the way. Yes, Austin. Whew. Let's take a deep breath. Here we go. Higher order functions. Okay, this is something we understand, right? A higher order function is a function that takes in a function as an argument. We saw an example of this up earlier. One example that we see a lot are array functions like map, filter, reduce, find, etc. So let's create a function called square that is going to take in a number. So we're going to call this x, and we're going to multiply that number by itself. So we're going to square that number. So here we've defined a function, called it square. We've captured it in a variable called square. And we'll make an array, we'll call map, and we'll pass in a function. So map is a higher order function. It's a function that takes in a function as an argument. Then map is going to return a brand new array. So if we run this, we see the brand new array that map returns off of these numbers here. So kind of like that, but not exactly. The higher order components are like this, but with one extra stipulation. So higher order component is a component that takes in a component or multiple components as an argument. So that's the first part. This is the part that's like higher order functions, but the extra stipulation is it must return a new component. So kind of like this pattern here. The return, we want to keep our comments. The returned component can be a functional or class component. And then two more rules here for higher order components before we look at how we create these. So let's just do this. We're going to say these are, let's just go like this. Rules of higher order components. 1. It takes in a component or multiple components as an argument or arguments. It must return a new component, whether that's a class or functional component, depends on the use case. Number 3, HOCs, higher order components, are never rendered in JSX. Okay, and then last one, the component returned from an HOC is captured by a variable and then rendered in JSX. And you'll see exactly what I mean by these last two rules. We can understand these pretty well. We can even understand this pretty well, but you'll see how this works, this last rule here, once we jump into Code Sandbox. Okay, yeah, any questions about this before we look at it in the code? Ooh, good question, not yet. No, app has not been an HOC, but, and I'll show you the difference here. That's a good question though. Can the HOC be either class or functional? Yep. It must return, HOCs must return a new component, and the returned component can be functional or class component. The word captured can be replaced with closured. Not quite. What I mean by captured is something like this. When you call a function that returns some value, whether that's a function, a number, object, it doesn't matter. If a function returns something, then you can do this in front of that function call, and whatever that function returns will be captured by this variable here. So let's take a look at that. That's a good question, and something that I think confuses a lot of people with these frameworks, because this is a pattern that we see a lot, but we overcomplicate it in our minds, and we say, and we don't look at it in JavaScript fundamentals. So let's create a function, const. We'll just go back to our very first function, const number equals a function that returns the number 42. So if I say const something equals number invoked, and then console log something, not something, something. There we go. What is this console log? What is this going to console log? Yeah, 42. Exactly. So we're capturing the value that's returned by invoking number. So what is returned when we invoke number? Well, look to the right of the arrow, and it's that number right there. Oh, I think we have too many number functions. So there we go. Something has captured the value of whatever this function returns. So no matter what we return out of this function, when we call this function here and we put this in front of it, we're going to capture that value into this variable. So I could say, we could do this as an object. We could say number is 42. And we get that object that's been returned captured by the variable something. We could do an array. And something is going to capture that array. So whatever number returns, something is going to capture it. So if this function returned a component, then we would console log a component. If this returns a function, then we're capturing a function. So that's what I mean by captured. It's not, there is closure happening, but I don't want to replace this with closured because I don't want us to get too confused there. Okay, all right. Are you ready? We need some like pump up music. You know, like they play at basketball games as the team's coming out or something. So we're gonna start a brand new code sandbox here. And there is that. And let me start up a live session. If we keep running into weird sandbox problems like we have the last 2 days, we may not do the live sessions anymore. But we'll try it out today and possibly tomorrow and see how it goes. Okay, all right. Higher order components. Oh yeah. Before we code this out, I do want to do one more thing. Sorry. I got you all pumped up, and now I'm going to do one more thing. So what is the purpose of higher order components? The general answer is when higher order components are written to share common state logic. Or we'll even just, we'll take state out. We'll just say common logic between components. So this is one purpose of a higher order component. If you notice that you have 5 components, nice, Darian. Yeah, love it. If you notice that that you have 5 components that all do the same thing, that all have the exact same logic, and you don't want to write that logic 5 times, you can write one higher order component that takes in each of those 5 components as an argument. It will return a new component for each instance that you pass in those components. Then we capture the new component that's returned out, and we have basically with the new component that's returned, we have a carbon copy of the component that was passed in plus some added functionality. So if we're writing an HOC for this purpose, we make a carbon copy of the passed in component with the added functionality. All right, so that's purpose number 1. Purpose number 2 is conditional rendering. And when we do this, we pass in 2 components and use some logic to determine which gets rendered. So these are our 2 purposes. In the lecture today, we'll look at both. In the project for today, you're just this is the one that you're going to be doing. Sorry, is my mic not working very good? Okay. Good question here. Why was I tempted to put state in there before? So this right here. Mostly because of hooks. So yeah, when I do an intro to hooks for you all, I'll talk about that. But for now, I'm not going to answer that question because that's my prerogative as the instructor. Oh, sorry. All right, cool. It got worse. Okay, we're going to open up Code Sandbox, and we're going to look at this first example or this first use case here to share common logic between components. So we're going to write an HOC that turns a component's prop to all caps. Okay, so that's our goal for this higher order component. We're going to take a break and we'll come back and start this. So I'll see you back in 5 minutos. All right, time's up. Let's do this. Leroy Jenkins. I wanted to yell that in the real Leroy Jenkins voice, but then I didn't want to hurt your ears, so. Whew. All right, HOC, not to be confused with AOC. Haha, that was awesome, by the way. Good one. So in order to understand this, I'm not going to lie. The syntax for HOCs is very confusing, very hard to follow. You, for the next half an hour, will be very confused with this example, and that's okay. The next example we see will be easier to follow, and that's what you're going to be expected to do in the afternoon assignment. But I just want you to see this logic again so that you understand what is happening. So yeah, just fair warning, don't get frustrated if this is like totally doesn't make sense. All right, so we want a component that turns its props to all caps. So let's write a title component first that we're going to render in place of this H1. So we're going to say const title, and this is going to take this string as a prop. So we're going to have props here. We're going to return an H1. And we're inside here, we're going to render props.title. We'll say props.text. Yeah. And I'll show you why in a second, why I changed that. So instead, I'm going to cut that. And instead of rendering this H1, I'm going to go ahead and render my title component. And our title component is expecting a text prop. So I'm going to give it a text prop of hello code sandbox. Cool, cool. But remember, our goal is to turn this text into all caps. So let's, before we render our H1 here inside title, let's do const uppercase text. And let's take props.text and let's uppercase it to uppercase. Slide this over a little bit, slide these over a little bit. Okay, so we've got now uppercase text. So instead of rendering props.text, let's render uppercase text. Yay, we did it. So we accomplished the goal, we just haven't made an HOC that does this yet. Let's do the same thing for this H2. We're going to say const subtitle equals props arrow. Now the reason you might be thinking, well, why don't we just reuse title here? The reason we're not just reusing title is this title is an H1, our subtitle is an H2. So there's a little difference that makes it so we can't reuse title. So let's return an H2. And again, we're going to render props.text. And this is why I wanted to change props from props.title up here to props.text, because they're both going to take in the same prop, which will be important when we write our higher order component. Okay, so I'm gonna cut this and I'm going to render subtitle. And I'm gonna pass in that text as text, as props.text. So as I'm sure you're guessing, we want this text capitalized. So we're going to do this, we're going to copy this logic, paste it here, and then render uppercase text. But wait a second. If we're reusing the same logic in multiple components, we can write a higher order component to do that. We don't need to copy and paste logic, right? Man, it's like I wrote this example for higher order components or something. So here comes the magic part. Here comes our higher order component. Before we write the actual higher order component, we're going to, let's just write a regular component that does this logic here. So let's do, we'll say const caps is a component that takes in props that has our uppercase text logic. And we're going to return. So here's the hard part. Let's see, what do we want to return? Well, in the case of title, we're returning an H1. In the case of subtitle, we're returning an H2. So what if we had a prop or an argument here that was a component, and we just returned that component instead of like an element? So yeah, this is really close to what we're trying to accomplish. Nice. So let's change this up a little bit. We're just going to add one tiny little thing here. First, we need to look at our rules. So number one, we need to write a function, a functional component that takes in a component as an argument. We've got this second part down. Okay, so we're going to write this function here to take in a component. And now, if we pass in a component to this function, if we call this function with invoking parentheses and pass in a component, like we'll say title, what's going to get returned from here? What gets returned from this function call? Let me close that and open this up. Not quite a function. Yeah, well, but this is a special function. What is this? Before we added this, what does this pattern look like? Yeah, functional component. Perfect. So this is a functional component. So if I do this, and then I look at what's returned from here, all I have is an anonymous functional component. So when I invoke this, the return value is an anonymous functional component. Yeah, I know we haven't finished this out yet. We'll get there, okay? All right, so now that we've determined that, when we invoke this function, it's technically a component, but we actually treat it more like a function than a component, because rule number 2, or rule number 3, we never render this in JSX. But we still call it a component. So when we invoke this function and we pass in a component, the return value is an anonymous functional component. So let's look at rule number 4. The component returned from an HOC, right here, that we've highlighted, this component, functional component that's returned from our higher order component, is captured by a variable and then rendered in JSX. So let's capture this function that's being returned by going like this. So now we have captured in this variable a function, a functional component. So we can, excited title. No, it's angry because it's yelling, see? It's yelling. It's angry yelling. So in this variable here, we've captured whatever's returned out of this function, which is an anonymous functional component. Now, what's up with title right here? What's going on with title? Well, this is going to come into this function call, and this inner function, because of closure and scope, has access to whatever's passed in here. So we're going to render the component like that. So now this functional component is rendering whatever we pass in here. Now, just like our multiply function, we can do this again to create another component. Now we have 2 components captured in these. And whatever we pass into these parentheses, that's what's going to be rendered right here. So let's do this real quick. We're going to let our HOC take care of this logic. So we're just going to take this logic out of title and subtitle. And instead of rendering this now, we'll just render props.text. Since title and subtitle are being rendered up here, that's what we see here. But what we want to do is we want to render angry title and angry subtitle. One little change we're going to make. This is the standard practice for higher order components. We actually don't capitalize higher order components. The reason for that is, since we never render a higher order component in JSX, we don't want to, we name these with lowercase names so that we don't accidentally try to render a higher order component. And there's actually a pattern for this. where we say with and then whatever we're trying to do. So we're going to say with uppercase. So that's what we're going to name our higher order component, which means we have to call that there. Now, really good point from Chad. It has to be captured in a variable. Yes, we do capture this in a variable because we are going to render this in our JSX. And this variable has to be uppercase because we're going to render it as a custom component in JSX. Remember, if we try to do something like lowercase title, it doesn't work, right? Or lowercase subtitle. Custom components have to be uppercase. So we are going to capture this in a variable. It needs to be uppercase. Now let's go do this. We haven't done anything with our logic yet, so let's just hide that for a second. And let's go render angry title and see what we get. Oh no! What do you think? What do you think happened here? Let's follow the flow of props from app into angry title into title. Okay, so angry title takes in props.text. So if we go down to angry title gets created by our HOC. So it's right here. Oh, so angry title is rendering title right here, right? So this is basically as if we had rendered title. But props.text is just chilling here in props. Yeah, Josh, you're exactly right. We haven't passed in text. Title is expecting props.text. So if we do text equals props.text, hey, look at that. We completed the circle. So now let's render angry subtitle. Angry subtitle. Perfect. So let's follow the flow of props for angry subtitle. Angry subtitle passes in a prop called text. So let's go see what angry subtitle is. Angry subtitle is whatever this returns with subtitle passed in. So we go do with uppercase. What does this function return? It returns a component that renders whatever component we passed in and passes in text via props.text. So props.text, the value for that is this string here. We pass in text. So props.text is getting its value from this. Now the cool part. Let's do the shared logic here. Instead of passing props.text here, we're going to pass in uppercase text. Because in both cases for title and subtitle, they're both receiving a text prop, which means they'll both flow through this props here. So if we do props.text.to uppercase, both of these instances of our higher order component will uppercase these two strings. And so if we pass in the value of uppercase text rather than just passing props.text through, both of them should render the uppercased text. You think it's going to work? Yes. Don't you doubt me. Okay. Emoji time. I want to see some mind-blown emojis. There we go. Or if you hate higher order components, you can send some anger emojis too. Just let it all out, whatever you're feeling. Let's take an early break, just a couple minutes early, and then, well, actually, just kidding. I got you excited, but I lied. There are a couple questions that I saw up above. We're going to look at those. We'll go through this flow one more time. I'll talk through the flow one last time, and then we'll take a quick break. Okay, so the last question. Ooh, nice. That looks like something good to take a look at. Let's see. So we talked about this. So component is a component argument. Yep. Letting us pass in components. Yeah, exactly right. Yes, yes, yes. So it's uppercase text needed in both title and caps. Yeah, we saw that we took that away. That was the shared logic that we removed out of these components and put it inside here. Now, I probably wouldn't go to all the trouble of writing a higher order component if it was just for 2 components, right? I mean, it depends on the logic. If the logic is really complicated and 50 lines long, then maybe I'll just write that once and save myself some time and some space. But if it's something like this where it's just 1-line thing, then I'm probably not going to do that. But again, this is just a simple example for us to learn the pattern. Nice, got to connect the wires. Yep, we got that. Where is the uppercase coming from? If you're 2 uppercase commented out, we just did that. Perfect. Okay, cool. So let's walk through this logic. Let's walk through this flow one more time, and then we will take a break. So let's do it both directions. We'll start here, and we'll work through all the way to these 2 components, and then we'll start at these 2 components and work through the other way. All right, so app is rendering this div, which is rendering angry title and angry subtitle and passing in a text prop. So what are angry title and angry subtitle? We have to come down here to where they're defined. This is where those 2 variables are defined. And if we look at the value of those 2 variables, we see that they are function calls. So the value that they're capturing is whatever this function is returning. So then we have to find with uppercase. With uppercase is defined here as a function that returns an anonymous functional component. So angry title, the value of angry title is this right here. I can literally copy and paste and type in title, and I get the exact same thing. Let me do that again. I can take this anonymous function, anonymous functional component. I can copy this. I can replace that. Component comes from whatever's passed in, right? So we had passed in title. So I can render title for angry title, and I get the same result. I could do the same with angry subtitle and just replace component with subtitle because that's what's being passed in and get the same result up here. So that's what's happening here. We're replacing this expression with this anonymous functional component. We are replacing this component, whatever's being rendered here, with whatever gets passed in here. Let's call this, we'll just call this passed component because we're passing it in. Then whatever component that we pass in here gets rendered from these components. These are now components that we can render. And these components render this component, which comes from here, which come from here. So title is being rendered here, and title is rendering a string from props.text. So what is the value of props.text? Well, that's right here. Props.text gets passed in and gets the value of uppercase text, which is the props.text that we passed in up here, and then set to uppercase. So this props.text comes from here. This props.text comes from here. Maybe we can draw out some arrows. Yeah, let's do a different color, like that. So inside our HOC, props.text.toUppercase gets its value from where this is rendered, up here. So we can do that. And then when we render our passed component, we pass in a text prop to either title or subtitle. And then title and subtitle render this uppercased value there. Okay, one last question that came in, and then we'll take a break and we'll look at the other use case for higher order components. So Christian says, from your experience, would defining my HOC with new components above line 6 be considered as best practice? Actually, we're going to see this in just a second, where we are going to break these out into their own files. So I think the best practice is going to be just what we've done, where we're defining components inside their own files and then importing that into here. So we'll see that in just a second. But yeah, great question. Nice. Okay, let's take a break, and then we will come back and finish this up. All right, last part. Here is the replet, by the way. So I did miss a question a little bit higher up, sorry. But I think this is a great way to look at this. So since we changed this now to past component, then the question would be, is past component equivalent to the callback argument in a higher order function? Yeah. So when we were talking about this, we looked at higher order functions and said that the definition of a higher order function is a function that takes in a function as an argument. So a higher order component then is a component that takes in a component as an argument. So we see that here. This is technically a component that takes in the component as an argument. So yeah, great comparison there. Okay, so I'm going to end this live session and we're going to create a new sandbox. So just for, well, I'll just open this up in a new code sandbox. All right, so here is the link here. And let me start a live session. Close these out. Okay, so this one, the goal for this is to create a hawk that conditionally renders one component or another component. So that's our goal with this component here. Now I'm going to give you what app is going to look like. Let's see, what do I want from here? I want everything but that. Okay, so we're going to app group element. Okay, so I'm going to replace that and remove that. All right, so let me give you this. And go ahead and replace your app with this. We'll take a look at this. We've got some state with a property called show first. That right now is true. And then let's just close this for a second. Then we've got a toggle components function that runs this dot set state and toggles show first to the opposite of what's on state. So every time we click this button, we're basically going to be toggling this state here. So let's see that happen. I'm going to open this up. No, not my dev tools. There we go. All right, so let's take a look at this in the React tools. So I've got show first here inside app. As I click this button, it toggles from false to true. So the idea is we're going to build two components. And when we click this button, we're going to toggle rendering one component or the other. And in your project this afternoon, you're going to do the same thing. You're going to be conditionally rendering a component, but based on something that's in local storage rather than just this toggling here. Okay, so let's go ahead and do that. We're going to build a new directory called components. And let's add a file called firstComponent.js and a file called secondComponent.js. And then I'm going to give you the code for these components. So here is first component. And second component is very similar. Basically, all what these two components are doing is rendering an H1 that says, hi, I'm the first, or I'm the second component. And that's it. So go ahead and add both of those to your two components. All right, now we're going to write our higher order component. So we're going to do this in its own file, and we're going to call this one with conditional render. Now, because this is a component, we still have to do import React from React. Then we're going to write our conditional component, or our conditional, with conditional render component. Okay, so let's just build this out as a component first, and then we'll build it out as a higher order component. So we're first going to say, we're going to call this by its name with conditional render. And we'll just say this is a component that is going to, we're going to do a conditional check. And inside here, we're going to return some component. If this conditional check is truthy, if it's falsy, we'll return a different component. Then we export default with conditional render. Okay, so this is going to be the inner component that is being returned from our HOC. Remember that we talked about how we can take in one or more components as an argument. In this case, we're going to take in two components. So let's go ahead and add our first component here. And if our check is true, we're going to render first. But we need a second component, right? So we're going to bring in a second component. And if this check is false, we're going to render our second component. Let me slide this over a little bit. Okay, so we have to figure out what this check is going to be. Any thoughts on what we can do inside here? I don't expect you to know this, but if someone knows it, that'd be awesome. What do you think we're going to do inside this check? Yeah, nice. Something with props. Yeah, and it has to do with the toggle value in state. Yes. You guys are awesome. Okay. So we don't have the state. The state's here inside app, right? So we don't have access to this dot state inside our conditional render component, but we can pass this value down as a prop to whatever we render here, right? So if we render, we'll just call this conditional HOC. If we pass this down as a prop, show first, we can pass the value of this dot state dot show first. And this prop will be passed into right here. So we'll say props dot show first. If this is true, then we'll show our first. If that's false, we'll show our second. So now to wire this all up, I'm going to split this out over here. And over here, we're going to look at index. There we go. Let's just close that like that. Okay, so inside my index.js, I need to import all three components. So I'm going to import first from /components/first component. Let's call this first component. I'm going to import second component. And I'm going to import my with conditional render. We already know that we want to name this new component conditional HOC. Let's just call it conditional render. So we know we want to call it conditional render. So let's, above the class here, let's do const conditional render equals. And what is this going to equal? What value are we going to give conditional render? Several people typing. I am scrolled to the bottom, so I will see responses. We got the first half. Yeah, we're gonna oh, there we go. Mario got it. 20 points to Charles and Christian, 50 points to Mario. Oh, we're gonna take away 10 points because you didn't add the with. 40 points for Mario. Yeah, exactly right. So we're going to say, we're going to call our function, and let's take a look at what our function needs, what we give it, what we pass it as arguments. So we've got one function here that takes in our first component. So there's one function, and we're going to pass in first component. Then we've got a second function that takes in a second component. We're going to pass in our second component. And then don't let this part trick you. This, you might think that you need to invoke this one more time because there's 3 arrow functions here. But really what's happening is this. This is really what the structure is that we want to, that we kind of see from this function call. We're going to invoke a function twice. It's going to return an anonymous functional component. So we don't have to invoke this a third time and do anything with props. That happens right here, right? This is the third invocation. This is the props that get passed down to that function. But because we're cool and we don't like writing returns like this, we're just going to leave it up here on one line. So this is the normal practice that you'll see with higher order components. I just don't want you to think that you need to invoke this 3 times. It just needs to be invoked twice. By the way, this is a pattern called currying functions. Curry spelled just like the 2 famous basketball brothers. When you curry function calls. So that's just an FYI. You can check that out on the Googles later. Okay, should we go see what this does? Here we go. Hey, look at that. We're rendering a function. Let's go see why first component is being rendered here. Well, we're rendering conditional render, and we're passing in show first as a prop, which is taking in this value here. So right now, show first is true. So what is conditional render? Conditional render is this function call, which comes from this. So we're rendering this component right here. This component is this component, or this component is this. So we've got props.showFirst being passed in, and the value right now is true. So let's see what happens in here. If props.showFirst is true, we render first component. And that's exactly what we're doing. If props.showFirst is false, we render the second component. If we toggle this, or maybe we can toggle it with our button, then we're running set state, which means we run render again, which means conditional render gets invoked again, which means it receives new props, and it'll evaluate this one more time. So every time we click this button, this logic will get evaluated again. And it will receive the new value for show first. And then it'll render a component based on that. So let's check this out. This is really interesting under the hood here. You'll notice that we've got this unknown component here. This unknown that's being displayed, you'd kind of expect it to be conditional render, right? Right here. But it's called unknown because we could actually name this whatever we want. We could do this, we could write this again and name it a different name and still name this and still call with conditional render. But it would be the same component that's being returned. So the React dev tools are smart enough to know that, hey, this is a higher order component. So we're just going to call it unknown here because this is a anonymous function, an anonymous functional component. So kind of weird, but yeah, we see that we are wrapping our component that's being displayed inside this higher order component. And then we're displaying first component or second component completely based on what show first is being passed down as. Sorry, everything's saved now. Okay, that wraps up the lecture, but let's take a look at questions and see if there's anything else we want to talk about before we take one last look at the project. I didn't see any other questions coming in, so I think this is the question we have here. So why are the parameters in with conditional render not first and second? Ooh, great question. To answer that, let's look at this. No, let's not look at this. Let's open this up. So why did we not say first and second here? Why did we say first component and second component? Well, inside the function definition, you can name the arguments whatever you want, right? But when you pass in an argument, or I guess these are parameters, you can name the parameters whatever you want. But when you pass in the argument, it has to match the name of something that exists in this file. So the thing that exists for our first up here is first component coming from this import. So this has to be named whatever this is. We could, since this is a default import, we can actually rename this banana and pass in banana. We should be able to, right? There we go. And then we still get the same result. So this is really a banana name here. This has to match whatever is going on up here. This really has no relation as far as the naming goes. The only relation this has is whatever the value of this is that gets passed in becomes the value of this parameter. So yeah, great question. That's why, remember I started out saying, let's import first from first component. And then I changed and said, actually, let's just bring it in as first component, because I didn't want you to get confused by this needing to be named first, just because this is named first. Something happened. What the heck? I don't know what happened. My computer is spelling out bad words over here. Oh man, okay. Let's fix things. First component, second component. That was super trippy. I was literally just pushing Command Z. I wasn't doing anything different than that. Okay, import first component, import. Why is this now? This one's all good. Import first component. Oh, from. Something is going really weird here. Okay, I'm just going to refresh. That was the weirdest thing. I've never seen anything do that. Let's see if this works better. First. And then we render it, we call it a second time. Oops, copy, paste, falsy. Okay, weird, that was crazy. There was like aliens attacking my keyboard or something. All right, let's see if there's any other questions. Sorry for that. So why doesn't it have to be the same as, oh, hey, yeah, great question. When we, turn off my notifications, when we export something as the default export, what it does is it exports this thing that you're exporting, and then when you import it, you get to choose the name that it's imported under. So if I named this foobar and exported foobar, then I could import it still as first component, or I could import it as banana, as we saw before. So this, the import for default export does not have to match the name. We're going to learn about named exports, which is the other kind of exports. There's default exports and named exports. And as you can imagine, a named export, the namespace or the naming does follow the export. And you have to import it as that name, and then you can rename it when you export it or when you import it. But we'll get into that either next week or in Redux week. Okay, any other questions? Please don't name it banana. What if you have multiple exports from the same file? Then you use named exports. Great question. When you export, you're telling it what function in that file to export. When you import, you're telling it how you want to reference that exported function. Oh, great. A quick announcement. Everybody, Josh is going to be taking over for my position. You always have really good explanations. Thanks for the help. Sometimes you explain things better than I do. All right, cool. Let's call it a day. Well, no, let's look at the project and then we'll call it a day. Not a day, we'll call it a morning, and then you can take lunch. So today you'll be building a higher order component. The higher order component will not let users see the post until you have logged in. Our login system for this will be faked using local storage. And the job of the HOC will be to render a login page if the user is not logged in, then render the posts after the user is logged in. So the way this is going to work is, and this is, every step is mapped out for you, but your first component is going to be a login page. And you'll have a form, you'll have a login page. When you click login, you're going to do something like local storage.set item and user, and I don't know, some username is Bob. So this is the local storage API in your browser. And it has quite a few different functions you can run off of it. So you've got local storage.set item, where you can set an item to local storage. And you pass in a string with the item name and then a value. So this is basically like a key value pair, but in local storage. Then somewhere, anywhere you are in your app, you can run local storage.get item, and you call that item that you want to retrieve the value of. So if you at some point run set item, like inside your login component, if you run set item and then set like a user, then you can get that value that you set as the user by running get item and then user here. And then there's a couple other ones. You can do local storage. What's cool about this, since this is a browser API, you can run this anywhere in your application, and it will always be able to access your items. So then you can do remove item and item name, or if you just want the wildcard removal, locat storage, local storage. Or there's also local storage dot clear, and that will clear out your entire local storage. So let's actually remove this. Let's pull this into app where our button click is, and I'll show you how this works. All right, I realized that I should probably teach local storage before I let you loose on today's project. So we'll do that real quick. This will only take another minute or so. Okay, so when we toggle, we're going to set our state. But we're also going to set something to local storage dot set item. Actually, let's do this. Ooh, this is gonna be cool. So let's do local storage dot set item. And we're just going to call this user. No, we'll call this show first. And we're going to pass in this dot state dot show first. So let's go see what this does. We're toggling, which means we've set show first to local storage. So if you come to your dev tools and go to the application tab, and then on local storage, expand local storage and click on this, you can see local storage here. Now you can do a couple things here. You can click on that and delete the selected item. So we could delete user out of here and this test, whatever this test thing is. Or you can just clear all out of here. So if you want an easy way to delete local storage, then you can clear that. But then, of course, when we click on the button again, we get show first back in here. Okay, so let's see. Let's now use local storage. Let's say if this dot state dot show first is false, then we're going to if this dot state dot show first is false, then we're toggling it to true, right? So we're going to set local storage dot set item. We're going to set that to true. If it's true, then let's remove show first. And then we'll toggle the state. So let's look at this again. Okay, so it's false right now. So we're not logged in, I guess is a way to look at this. And then we log in, and now we have a value on local storage, and we're showing the first component. So it's false, it's true. When we're toggling from true to false, we remove this value from local storage. When we were toggling from false to true, then we add it back into local storage. Okay, that's what's happening here. Now, if we, instead of passing down show first, if we just do this, then inside conditional render, instead of checking props.show first, let's check local storage dot get item show first. So if there is an item called show first, we're going to show the first component. If there's no item in local storage called show first, we're going to display the second. So we have show first in here, then we toggle again, show first is gone, so now we're showing the second. So that's basically how your app is going to work today, except when you have nothing in local storage, so the second component will be your login function, or excuse me, your login component. If you have a user logged in, then you're going to show your posts page. Again, this is all walked through here. So your tasks, create a post page. You're going to move a lot of your logic from app.js to a post page component and get that working. And that is so we clean up our app component before we refactor that to be wrapped in an HOC. Then you build out your HOC, and we walk through all of that. Then you build out your login page, walk through all of that. Then you build out the functionality inside your HOC to match something that looks like this. So again, this is very hand-holdy today, very direct in every step to take through this whole process, even like to the point of almost giving you code for it. But that warning again, our solution, if you look at the solution, it does not look anything like what we saw today. So just fair warning there. Follow the steps, don't follow the solution. And then of course the stretch problems for today. Okay, now I'll see if there's any last questions. Looks like we're good. So have a great day. Thanks for sticking through, pushing through this confusing higher order component stuff. Just follow the steps, you'll be fine. If this totally doesn't make sense to you, don't stress about it today. Tomorrow is going to be easy. This has higher order components are not on the sprint challenge on Friday. So this is not a project or something to worry about. This is really advanced pattern that if you can learn it, then that's an extra tool in your tool belt, but not something to stress about. So, all right, have a great afternoon, and I'll see y'all tomorrow.